Welcome to LMDtv. I'm Andrea Melisa. This week on Talking Business, Anushan Selvarajah speaks with the Managing Director of Resplendent, Ceylon, Malik J Fernando, on what the tourism sector can expect going forward.
Welcome to the show, Malik. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Anushan. Delighted to be here.
Now, up to now, there's been a lot of talk about regulations that need to be brought in, health regulations for the hospitality sector so that they can open up. Putting that aside, Malik, what does the industry have to do now to take the tourism sector forward?
See, right now, uncertainty is the order of the day. I mean, no one can really look forward 3-6 months forward. We're tracking, as of a month ago, things are looking reasonably optimistic with opening August 1 and so on. But with the global resurgence, we're still in, people talk of a second wave, we're obviously still in the first wave, but post-lockdown. So there's uncertainty. So it's very difficult in terms of saying what should the tourism industry be doing. Frankly, like most businesses, it's really about survival, controlling your costs, and trying not to do anything that will jeopardize your future. But really, the name of the game is survive for the next 3 to 6 months, because the pickup may be in January, as late as that, because summer holidays, which are in August of this year, because we're still not open, and many of the travel corridors are really more short haul, not long haul. It looks like a sort of Christmas, New Year return towards normalcy. So what we can do for the next few months is really to look at whatever to survive.
Okay, on that note, then let's look at the employees. Now, service charge, it's a major component of salaries and incentives for the employees in the hospitality sector. How is that being managed when there is virtually no service charge coming in right now?
See, there have been various concessions that have been offered, and through the Tourist Board, a cabinet paper offering 20,000 rupees per employee. So that's a huge, significant benefit. Of course, that's a loan payable over 5 years, and that should kick in hopefully from July or August. So that means for 6 months, whether if you're a registered accommodation provider or a tour operator, DMC, you get that subsidy of 20,000 rupees. Not a subsidy, I beg your pardon, but it's a low interest loan payable over 5 years. So it's quite concessionary. That's significant. And, the various other moratoriums and loans and so on. But I know many in the industry have introduced voluntary wage cuts, which is absolutely essential. Some may be struggling, to pay despite that. So really the name of the game is survival. I mean, we've been focused on training, on, coming out with our health and safety protocol and being ready for the resumption of tourism. But now there's obviously a lag before it returns, and domestic travelers, depending on the property, and the reduction in rate levels, in our case, it's about 15 to 20% of occupancy, which is still below break even. Some properties with reduced rates more significantly have a higher local occupancy, which is good, because going forward, we need to have a core local customer base, and these local customers have discovered, the quality of hotels locally are pretty good. That's because they're not able to travel overseas, so they're forced to travel locally, and that has been a boon. But that still doesn't mean that hotels are operating at break-even levels. Employees don't have service charge, or are getting a lower service charge now on lower revenues on local business. So really what the industry is doing is trying to maximize the benefits of the moratoriums and the concessions from government, but that's still, it's still tough going despite all of that.
Now, rightly, as you just mentioned, domestic tourism is going to be a vital component moving forward. But Malik, up to now, what we have seen so far is that it's only when there is a debacle or a problem facing the tourism sector that these offers and discounts are given out to domestic tourists. Shouldn't there be a longer term plan in place to engage domestic tourists, to keep them engaged with what we have to offer?
See, the problem with local tourism is obviously spending power. Everyone is impacted. So even the local traveler, there's obviously a pent-up demand to travel post the lockdown. but many potential local tourists also impacted. Their businesses are impacted. Some of them are having difficulty making ends meet. So it depends on the kind of property, because I know there are some brands which have a significant ongoing local share of business, which may be 30%, 40%. Ours is a lower number, maybe 8 or 10%. So it depends. The thing though is that looking at operating costs of hotels, the cost of building new properties, and the payback being 8, 9, 10 years, it's really you can't take your rates too low. So at the rates which local travelers may find attractive now, the hotels are still suffering. So it's tough. I think some hotels are positioned better for local travelers, others less so because they can't drop their rates to that level. But it depends on, again, the local demographic. You've got people who travel from here overseas and stay in nice 5-star properties overseas, who are discovering beautiful boutique properties like ours and others here at home. And then you've got the mid-market traveler who has various options available to them. But obviously, as hotels become fuller with tourists, they need to take their rates up because anyhow, we were slightly lower on the rate scale. We were never really, our average daily rates in the hotel industry in Sri Lanka was towards the low side, given the cost of construction and given break-even levels. So that's really the challenge in terms of long-term attractiveness to the local traveler.
Now, Malik, in LMD's recent A-lister special issue on the COVID pandemic, you say that hotels cannot be treated like hospitals. Now, we do agree with you, but could you just elaborate on that?
No, what I mean is that people still come to the hotels for a pampering experience. Particularly the high-end properties like ours. They want the hotel's services. So and they go to a hotel to de-stress, to relax, to rejuvenate. So if they feel like they're entering an ICU, medical establishment, if everyone's, masks obviously are absolutely critical, but your procedures need to be a little bit more discreet. They need to be behind the scenes. You need to be taking every possible precaution. But visually, aesthetically, the guest has to be relaxed. So it's a tough balance.
Then in that same vein, Malik, what about wellness and health tourism? Now, we have the capability for this. We have the space. We have the trained staff. We have the expertise. Why is this not being looked into?
Yeah, wellness is huge. If you look at generally how travel is growing, luxury high-end is the fastest growing. Together with wellness as well, that's even a faster growing combination. If you look at our assets in that regard, with our indigenous traditional medicine, Hela Vedakama, as well as Ayurveda, we've had a long term Ayurveda tradition, but it's not, in my view, and I think my friends who are in the Ayurveda tourism business also would agree, that we've not positioned it accordingly. Ayurveda has been viewed largely as Indian or Kerala. We've not pitched Sri Lanka in that area. There needs to be more work in the area of product development. And when people come, there need to be places they can stay, a broader range of places, more rooms that offer wellness tourism. So I think it is a big opportunity, and I believe the government is taking it more seriously going forward. All of this has to be research based, because we've got to have very key USPs. What does Sri Lanka stand for? Right now, we're viewed as a beautiful destination, but it's not distinctive. It's not viewed as a aspirational, wellness. So many angles that we can pursue to get more niche travelers who'll come back faster, who'll pay a higher rate. So I think wellness is a key platform that we should expand going forward, but there needs to be product development, and there needs to be actual products throughout the island where you can come and take advantage of that.
We're going for a short break, Malik. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the show as we continue our discussion with the Managing Director of Resplendent Ceylon, Malik J Fernando. Now, Malik, let's look at sustainability. The tourism sector needs a natural environment to thrive. It's what we have to offer tourists. But as of late, we've seen a number of instances where that has been put in jeopardy, and we fear that it may get worse. Shouldn't the tourism sector be more involved in ensuring that we actually have something to offer tourists?
No, absolutely. But a lot of these things are beyond the control of the tourism sector or the private sector. It all comes down to governance. It comes down from the overall framework of managing the country. And, those are areas where we have fallen short over the last couple of decades in terms of, the law being followed. And so if you look at why people come to Sri Lanka, it's our pristinity. There was a big pent-up demand after the war, and that's why you've had that sudden growth, and then it's kind of tapered off because people who really wanted to come did come, and there was no subsequent promotion. So, it kind of leveled off. But going forward, we have to protect our biodiversity. That is why people come. If we keep going at the current rate of so-called development and negligence of our natural resources and the environment, apart from it impacting citizens at large, it definitely impacts our attraction as for tourists. Whether it's our cultural sites, whether it is nature reserves, wherever you go in the country, it's really the nature, it's the beauty of this country and the warmth of the people that tourists are coming for. So that area, has been declining at a tremendous rate. And yet our tourism numbers are fairly low, at 2.3 million. That's relatively low. We could easily double that, but it's got to be handled carefully. And we do have to take far better care of our nature. If you look at the private sector, there are so many people, not just environmentalists, but people in the tourism industry who've been crying out loud about the desecration of nature or aspects of over tourism in our cultural sites and so on. But it takes willpower and determination by government, which I'm hopeful. I mean, of course, this COVID crisis has impacted so many plans, but I'm hopeful that towards the end of the year that all of us can get together and move in that direction, because that is the only way that we can secure our futures and to ensure that tourism in this country grows.
What is your take on travel corridors, Malik? You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but now the UK has also opened up some travel corridors, and there are reports that even Sri Lanka is looking into this. But what is your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, everyone is groping to find solutions. There's so much uncertainty. So obviously, people, because of the lockdown, there's been a huge pent-up demand to travel. So when things get resolved and when there's a vaccine, which could be end of this year, early next year, of course, it'll take a few more months or a year for people to be vaccinated and so on. When normalcy returns, in my view, travel is going to come back. But in terms of travel corridors, these are the initial steps by government to appease their citizens who want to travel. So the UK travel corridor is direct, short-haul flights, largely to Europe for their August summer holidays. Australia was looking at, New Zealand, South Pacific, but even that's on hold with the pickup in cases in Australia. So travel corridors, Sri Lanka is long haul for many countries. So for us to be in a travel corridor, I mean, we haven't opened up our airport yet, so we can't really feature in travel corridors until later on in the year. But essentially, it's countries picking and choosing which other countries are safe for their citizens to travel to and to be able to come back without needing quarantine.
Malik, what advice would you give to industry players to ensure that this industry keeps moving forward? Because we can't really ask the government for everything now, can we?
That's the question I think everyone in the industry has been asking themselves. I mean, considering the difficulties government is in, some of the concessions that have been extended have been pretty good. I spoke about them earlier. What government can do is to continue controlling the pandemic as they have been doing, which I think we're all pretty proud of. And a lot of it is outside our control in terms of what's happening in the rest of the world. But what the industry can do I think, is to help each other, is to be able to survive, is to seek support from local travelers, from domestic tourists to visit us. Um, and it's people are really scratching their heads as to how deep they can dig. There are some hoteliers who've got other businesses they could rely on. There are others who don't. So it's pretty much tough going, particularly when you don't have a window. We thought we did, and we were looking at maybe a September, October return of travelers. Now it may be towards the end of the year. So it's a tough one.
Finally, Malik, how do you see the next year or so panning out for the tourism sector?
See, I'm still optimistic about 21 because if there isn't a second wave, we're still in the first wave really, but if there isn't a second wave with the winter flus in Europe and North America, if the vaccines come out and or more effective cures and people are more comfortable traveling from around March of next year, you could see a return towards normalcy. What I am confident about is that this is temporary, that travel is not going to go away. Sri Lanka will be more popular than ever before, but we have to get our act together. We cannot continue to be complacent about our environment, over tourism, that we shouldn't continue to damage the asset, which is what tourists come for. And we need to have a far more strategic development of tourism in this country. Hopefully we're heading in that direction. If all those things happen, then we have to wait, bide our time till the rest of the world feels safe to travel. So despite the doom and gloom, I'm very optimistic about tourism in Sri Lanka. It is fast going to be our number one industry. It's something where we have a long-term sustainable advantage, unlike in industry and manufacturing. But when it will come back, it will come back very strongly. But let's, in the next 6 months or so, do what we can to position ourselves in terms of the product development, promotional strategy, and so on, to take full advantage of that.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. Thank you very much for joining us, Malik. It was a great pleasure.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Anushan. Bye.
After a short break, Andrea Melisa will be back with an update on Life on Earth. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Andrea Melisa. Let's take a look at life on Earth. Many organizations with a high volume of third-party relationships across their global operations fail to conduct complete due diligence checks during onboarding or ongoing monitoring stages. According to Refinitive's The Real Risks, Hidden Threats Within Third-Party Relationships report, risk exposure is increasing, but due diligence checks are not keeping pace. A third-party risk includes anything that could expose a company to threats or risks through the engagement with third parties, such as bribery and corruption, modern slavery, environmental crime, wildlife trafficking, or conflict minerals. With an average of nearly 10,000 third-party relationships to manage, compounded by competitive pressures, greater globalization, and increasingly complex supply chains, 63% of respondents agree that the economic climate encourages taking regulatory risks to win new business. Refinitiv notes that the sudden escalation of the COVID-19 pandemic helped shed light on the failings in due diligence, exposing the cross-border vulnerability of supply chains and the limitations of business continuity plans. However, more resources and technological innovation are helping businesses gain a clearer understanding of risk, although there's a lot more to be done. Among sectors that lead the way in conducting due diligence checks are automobile parts and industrial engineering, technology, media and telecommunications, and financial services, with 60% of third parties undergoing evaluation. Industrials at 54%, construction at 53%, and healthcare at 50% are considered the worst performers. From a global perspective, an average of 57% of third parties undergo due diligence checks. The US's performance is the strongest, with 66% being checked, followed by Hong Kong, Russia and the UK with 63% and South Africa with 62%. A majority of respondents, that is 60%, report that they do not fully monitor third parties for ongoing risks. Of those surveyed, 53% of organizations state that they would report a third-party breach internally, while a mere 16% would report a third-party breach externally. Meanwhile, 37% of respondents believe that a lack of data is a problem they face in identifying risks in their supply chains. When it comes to taking action, 93% of respondents report that spending increased after an enforcement action related to third-party risk. However, 62% of organizations report not knowing how many third parties they engage with outsource work to others. As for drivers and blockers to the visibility of third-party risks, 61% of organizations consulted say that prosecution would be unlikely if they breached third-party related regulations. Furthermore, only 50% of respondents report knowing of an enforcement action being taken against their companies in relation to a third-party risk. That's our show for this week. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. Thank you for watching LMDtv. Stay safe.